Today, narcissism is an insult thrown around on social media. But what does it really mean? What is the difference between narcissistic traits and a full-blown narcissistic personality disorder? Clinical psychologist Dr Ruth Ann Harpur helps us through the maze in this classic episode. We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon Music, and wherever you find your podcasts. Do you know someone who not only considers themselves special, but looks down on everybody else? Do they always have to be right, but can turn nasty and put you down? Have you been tempted to Google, what are the signs of narcissism? Perhaps you're already convinced that your partner, your parent, or boss is a narcissist. Maybe you've been told by someone that you are a narcissist or secretly wondered it about yourself. The term is thrown around so much these days with this or that public figure being labelled as one. I thought it time for a deep dive into the subject. Narcissism, a helpful diagnosis or something to turn an ugly situation even worse? My witness today is Ruth Ann Harpur, who's a clinical psychologist who specialises in relationships and the issues of narcissism. So, welcome, Ruth. How did you find your way to this specialism?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I fell into it, really. I spent most of my career so far working in the NHS and have always worked with what are called the cluster B personality disorders. Mostly what would be termed borderline personality disorders. And there's a whole debate about diagnosis anyway. And then I was working in private practice and I had a handful of people I was working with where there was some issues of narcissism. There was some grandiosity, there was some sense of entitlement, and they were challenging to work with. And at the time I was looking for a supervisor. And the pandemic had just started. And I thought, I'm not limited to supervisors I can meet face to face. So I actually contacted someone I'd done training with and had looked up to for many years, Wendy Behery, who developed Schema Therapy for Narcissism with Jeffrey Young, and asked if she would supervise me for those people I was working with. And that turned into a really fruitful supervisory relationship. And then I mentioned it to my colleagues who make referrals to me, and they were like, well, we have plenty of referrals for you. And it just kind of exploded. And I think when I started working clinically, I wasn't so familiar. I was familiar with the research and clinical literature in narcissism. I wasn't so familiar with the internet presentation of narcissism. And I started to look, and I was quite shocked at just the level of vitriol and quite hateful presentations of narcissism, as well as some quite helpful aspects of it where people were really beginning to understand that perhaps their parent or their partner or their ex-partner really was abusive to them in quite emotional and psychological ways. So it's often not obvious physical abuse. There's often a lot more psychological and emotional cruelty to it. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And then I was like, well, let me try and put out some more nuanced content about narcissism that actually really reflects what narcissism is and what narcissistic personality disorder, which is a disorder of narcissism, is. So I started doing that. And that's kind of how I've fallen into it. And it's certainly a really interesting area.
So let's sort of start with some sort of definitions. So what is the difference? I mean, what I've always found helpful is the difference between narcissistic traits and having a narcissistic personality disorder. Is that a helpful place to start for you, or is that going to muddy the water?
No, I think that's a really helpful place to start. And I would start even before narcissistic traits. Narcissism as a concept has evolved massively over many, many years. So there was obviously the Greek myth of Narcissus, who...
So tell us the myth, because I think actually getting the full myth is a very good place to start. So thank you for bringing that up. We have to remember when you tell us the myth that there is not only Narcissus, but he had a lover as well. And so we can look at this in a relational sort of kind of way. So tell us the myth.
So the myth is that Narcissus was born. He was born of a rape. His mother was raped by a river god. And his mother was told, she sought help. She asked how she could help her son live a long life. And a prophet told her son would live a long life if only he didn't see himself. And so she never let him see his reflection. So he doesn't know who he is. And he is exceptionally attractive. And many people fall in love with him and he rejects them all. And then one day he comes across a lake of water and he sees his reflection and he falls in love with his reflection. And he's mesmerized by his own image. And of course, he doesn't know it's himself. And he spends many, many hours just gazing at himself, trying to embrace his lover, which of course is just a reflection. And that horrifying reality when you try to embrace it and it just dissipates in your hands. So that's